Prego, prego. Comodi, comodi. Autorità.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, on behalf of the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Laura Boldini, and my personal behalf, I would like to renew my warmest welcome to the Senate of the Italian Republic on the occasion of the second session of the Extraordinary Conference of the Speakers and President of the Parliaments of the European Union for the 60th anniversary of the signing of the treaties that establish the European Community. I'm very grateful to the speakers who have chosen to attend this event to share their experience and their vision with regard to our union. I would also like to welcome very warmly the young men and women who are with us this afternoon. I'm sure that you would agree with me if I say that our responsibility is that of ensuring that we can hand over to them, true Europeans, a fairer, more united and safer union. Last evening we had some conversations. This morning we had a debate, and on both occasions we confirmed that the parliamentary celebration that we are holding to remember what happened in 1957 is not an exercise in style. It is not a matter of protocol. It is an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss. To remember how we were means respecting the suffering and sacrifice of those we owe our freedom to. And it also means having a common vision of our future. Naturally, we can have differences of opinion, but I am sure that we are all aware that we cannot stand still. We have to move forward, and we have to do this together. I believe that this is the true meaning of what we are called upon to do, i.e. to represent in parliaments the sentiments, ambitions and rights of our citizens. Going back to those days, I think it's important for us to recall that the true protagonists of that moment in history were not governments as such, but the people of Europe who asked for peace, food, freedom and dignity. The Second World War had laid bare our base instincts with unthinkable persecutions and violences. Fear, hunger, despair, dismay, disbelief and terror dominated our souls. And this was the context that in 1950 saw the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, which certainly had an economic goal, but it also was inspired by a new idea of shared sovereignty, because the true objective of the brave women and men who interpreted these sentiments was, in fact, eminently political. We are not forming a coalition of states, we are uniting men, said Jean Monnet. In the mid-50s, we pursued a federal ambition of a defense community. The fear was that a new and definitive conflict could have arisen. Alcide de Gasperi, as his daughter Maria Romana said this morning, realized that that was an opportunity that could not be missed. This design failed, all seemed lost. And yet, in 1955, from my Sicily, the integration path was once again revived. The Conference of Messina is where, against all odds, we saw a position prevail, that of pursuing a horizontal and general integration of European economies and not a more sectoral and limited approach. And to quote the declaration, the objective was that of ensuring that Europe could keep the place it occupies in the world, restore its influence and improve the living standards of its population. This was the foundation that then led to the establishment of the most balanced, politically most stable, and culturally most advanced supernatural system we have ever seen in the history of humankind. The European Union has kept its promises of peace, of rights, of well-being, and has delivered more than we expected. It even was able to outperform, let's say, compared to the expectations of those creative people who were considered, with some irony, as utopian. And I was born at the end of the Second World War, and therefore I very clearly remember the hopes in the eyes of my parents, of our parents, who were dreaming for their children a world without hatred, without violence, without deprivation. As we know, in recent years, the Union has had to face daunting challenges: economic and employment difficulties, inequalities, migrations, geopolitical instability along its borders, the fear of terrorism. We reacted, but not always showing solidarity and rationality. And some of our citizens have developed sentiments of disengagement, even hostility vis-à-vis the European design, which some politicians have dangerously been exploiting. To react by building moral, ideological and physical walls, to react with an inward-looking approach means denying our history, and this is certainly not the right approach. Nobody can feel safe. Nobody can achieve anything alone. Multilateralism, solidarity, diplomacy and pluralism are the very foundations of the approach that we have followed so far, and the only one that we can continue to follow for the future. Europe has a responsibility that goes beyond its borders. We all have gone down in history as being promoters of new and unimaginable parameters of civilization in political relations and social stability, in the promotion of rights and the rule of law. But our modern age requires that we meet new challenges and that we meet them as effectively as possible. Governments who will be meeting in Rome on the 25th of March will have to identify the best approach and the best way of facing the new status quo. It is necessary to invest in employment, in growth and innovation. Progress must be made in the monetary and banking union. We have to step up our common efforts in the fight against organized crime, terrorism, corruption and economic crimes. We have to also establish a European Prosecutor's Office, finally, and we have to manage in a far-sighted and human fashion migration and the flow of refugees. I trust in the wisdom and ability of Prime Minister Gentiloni and of his European colleagues, and I'm confident that we'll be able to understand the serious nature of the challenges we're facing, and they will be able to establish a new approach for the future of our union. Personally, I think that programming the future of Europe requires four different areas of interest. Firstly, we need to re-establish a sense of trust amongst governments to bring citizens closer to European institutions and our common values, and hence fend off the re-emergence of selfishness and nationalism, which, as we know, is the beginning of a totalitarian drift. Secondly, we have to address the issue of inequality. We know that even in the strongest countries, there is marginalization and exclusion, which affects too many European citizens, and they're vulnerable to fundamentalism and to crime. Thirdly, we have to react to the rapid decline in our population growth, and we have to therefore integrate migrants, and we owe to them economic and cultural well-being and wealth. Finally, we have to rethink our strategies in the global context, and we have to implement a true common foreign policy to once again play a leading role that is owed to us, given our history, values, and our economy. The risk of geopolitical marginalization is upon us. We need a new policy for the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and our guilty absence in recent years in that part of the world has, in fact, contributed to the phenomena that we're facing at the moment. This is an approach that requires that we be united and we show solidarity and cohesion. Nobody must be left alone, and we must not neglect the ambitions and commitment of those who wish to enhance cooperation more rapidly in certain areas, because we know that the ambition of a handful of utopians 60 years ago is what we must recognize as being the reasons for our privileged position in a state of peace in the name of freedom, democracy, and human dignity. Italy has been, is, and always shall be in the forefront in building this common home, because we believe in the common ideals that we share, and we're proud of our millennial history that has been marked by our approach to civilization with comprehensive geographical, political, and cultural view of the Mediterranean and Europe. So long live the Union, long live Europe.
Adesso la parola.
I'd like to give the floor to the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani. President of the Senate, Deputy President, and President of the Council, and Mr. Monti, representatives of the countries of the European Union. We are facing one of the most difficult moments in our 60 years of history. Many of our citizens feel bewildered, and this is also due to a general feeling of uncertainty inside and outside the European Union. The distance between people and the institutions is growing, even though the recent vote in the Netherlands shows that there's still a positive attitude to the Europe. We're about to negotiate for the first time the exit of an important member countries. Youth unemployment in many countries is unacceptable. We're threatened by terrorism and instability on our borders. There is concern with regard to an increase in migratory flows, and some of our neighbors seem to be moving towards illiberal authoritarianism, and many governments are tempted to use protectionism. The inability to provide effective responses to these fears fuels populism and the temptation of people to fall back upon national solutions. We have to demonstrate now that these challenges can only be resolved if we're united with the Europe of facts, though, by reducing unemployment, dealing with flow of migration, promoting stability and values in the worldwide. Splitting now and blaming other institutions for the situation will lead us nowhere. It is the time to be bold and to act responsibly in order to work together on common solutions in the interests of the peoples of Europe. And therefore, cooperation between European Parliament and national parliaments is increasingly important. We have all been directly elected by European peoples, and because of this, we have to be in the front line to bridge the gap between institutions and citizens. The Lisbon Treaty, for the first time, defined the role of national parliaments within the European Union. For example, They can assess whether the subsidiarity principle is complied with, contribute to treaties, and also contribute in the areas of security, freedom and justice. The treaty also indicates that national parliaments and the European Parliament are called upon to ongoing cooperation, ongoing interparliamentary cooperation. As President of the European Parliament, I intend to strive to ensure that this cooperation becomes increasingly effective and a concrete tool to allow us to find together solutions to our citizens' problems, to reduce unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. We have to work for a more competitive Europe, which pays more attention to the real economy. Alongside the Stability and Growth Pact, we need a generational pact. We cannot leave unmanageable debt to our young people, which will make it very difficult for jobs to be created. We have to hand on to them the benefits of our social market economy. Budget flexibility and the use of European funds have to be linked to the quality of the expenditure and reforms in the administrative area. This is a way to achieve a true convergence of our economies, which is essential in order to make sure that the euro brings benefits to all European citizens. Parliaments need to contribute to strengthen the European governance of the economy in line with the 3 reports on the future of the Union recently approved by the European Parliament, and therefore we need to more greatly involve national parliaments. This will make the indispensable reform process more effective and more democratic and increase the responsibility shared by states. Parliaments have to be active in the European semester and also in presenting recommendations in individual countries. Citizens and companies are asking us for simpler rules and procedures and for less red tape. Parliaments have a key role in improving the quality of legislation, in particular the implementation of European regulations. We should not get lost in details. The principle of subsidiarity itself should lead us to focus on the major global challenges: foreign policy, security, immigration, trade, combating climate change, and safeguarding basic freedoms. No European state on its own has the strength to negotiate with the United States, with China, or with Russia. Only together can we truly exercise our sovereignty. The Interparliamentary Conference on Foreign Policy and Common Security has to strengthen European action worldwide, not just to guarantee our economic interest or our security, but also to affirm the fundamental values in which we Europeans recognize ourselves, with which we identify. Therefore, we have to develop a European market and industry for defense. We need synergy, economies of scale, military resources which can act in a coordinated way in order to be more effective and save resources. This is a basis with which to build a true common defense, which I hope will be pursued from the next Declaration of Rome. It would be a major signal that we are starting up again after 63 years from the failure of the European defense community. This was the unachieved dream of Alcide de Gasperi with Gaetano Martina and others, the Italian fathers of our union. In order to protect our citizens from terrorism and crime or combat tax evasion, we need more mutual confidence. Our parliaments must work to promote greater cooperation between intelligence services, the judiciary, police forces, tax authorities, and promote the exchange of data and information. Together, we can contribute to the development of a European border police and coast guard with an effective use of our resources. Europe, in a spirit of solidarity, has to continue to ensure the right to asylum. We're working on a reform of the Dublin regulation in order to make it more effective, but we need a real reform, not just touching up on a regulation which is by now obsolete and ineffective. But we have to be equally firm in rejecting those who do not have a right to settle in the European Union. We need to deal with migratory flows, management of migratory flows at the root. We are facing an epochal event due to population growth, climate change, terrorism, wars, and poverty. And because of this, we need a common strategy which pursues the development of Africa, facilitating and accelerating growth, establishing reception centers in Africa in cooperation with the UN. Reducing migratory pressure, however, requires robust democracy and diplomacy. From the economic and diplomatic standpoint, the European Union allocate 20 billion euros a year for Africa. I believe that parliaments have to work to ensure that there is a more effective use of these resources. The European Parliament is about to develop a new development fund for Africa, and we need to overhaul the cooperation policy of the European Union in order to attract more private investment, build infrastructure, transfer know-how in security and administrative capability. To do that, we need to modernize our mechanisms for assistance. A few days from the 60th anniversary of the signature of the treaties, it's also necessary to consider which mistakes we've made and where we need to make improvements. But we should not be discouraged. We should not fail to be proud of what we managed to build together. We are the only continent in the world without a death penalty. The world looks to us when a journalist is imprisoned, when a woman is raped and sees her rights denied, or political opponent is imprisoned. We remain a beacon for fundamental rights, and we are much more than a market or a currency. We're all representatives of European peoples, and today we have a great responsibility to exercise strong political will and leadership around the values which underpin our being together. Our identity is made up of our values and our culture. Our identity is the defense of freedom and human rights, the respect of others, the defense of women's rights. And it is no coincidence that a member of parliament who, in parliament at Strasbourg, who said that women are less intelligent than men, was subjected to a penalty. The European Parliament opened a debate on our future by adopting the Verhofstadt-Bresebrock-Beresberg reports in the latest plenary in Strasbourg. 2 weeks ago, the Commission presented its white paper, and at the last European Council, the heads of state and government had a wide-ranging discussion. I wish to congratulate Donald Tusk on his re-election to President of the European Council. And I particularly appreciated the important contribution which under the initiative of Laura Boldrini, with the public consultation of August 2016 on the state and prospects of the European Union. The consultation led to a final report which was presented in February this year, and it's based on the Declaration of the 14th of September 2005, signed by the presidents of parliaments of 15 member states, aimed at providing new momentum to European integration. And I also greatly appreciated the decision of President Grasso to hold two important exhibitions on our cultural identity and to inaugurate them in conjunction with this meeting to prove that our roots are to be found in a culture and a history which goes back more than 1,000 years, and that our European culture is not something which has come together randomly. It's not just an aggregate of different member states. Mr. Timmermans yesterday was saying that if there had been no Caravaggio, there would have been no Rembrandt. And this is our civilization. This is our identity. To admire Caravaggio, you do not need to know Italian. You don't need to know the Dutch language to admire Rembrandt. All you have to do is to understand the message which comes from their works. In Rome on the 25th of March, the solemn declaration on the part of the heads of European institutions will take place. Today, more than ever, we need European unity. Certainly, the European Union has to be changed, but it should not be taken to pieces. It should not be weakened. We would all, as European citizens, pay an incalculable price for that. Europe is a story of success. It is embodied a story of progress and peace and prosperity. It is up to us, as representatives of European citizens, to change the image of an abstract, inefficient, and bureaucratic union. It's up to us to excite Europeans once again around a major project. It is up to us as national and European members of Parliament to give a new dream to 500 million people, and particularly the young want and need this. They want to believe, they want to dream, they want to hope. And it would be terrible for a political class which takes away from the young their hope and their wish to look forward to the future. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the challenge which we're called upon to respond to. I believe that no one will shirk this challenge. This is something we need to do for our children, because it is for them that we need to still provide a major dream for the future.
Alla parola il Presidente.
I'd like to now call on Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council.
Grazie. President Grasso, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is impossible to be a guest of the Senato della Repubblica and not feel the history trapped inside the walls of the Palazzo Madama. We are reminded not only of the political drama that everyone lives now every single day, but also centuries of great events that are Europe's birth certificate. For example, Cesare Maccari's Cicerone Denuncia Catilina, one of the masterpieces decorating the Senate walls, is absolutely perfect for today. It is a political allegory of the struggle of democratic institutions against populism and the triumph of one over the other. This reminds us, first, that the strength of any political community depends on its will to survive, on its vigor and cleverness. And second, that in the Darwinian political struggle, words always were and always will be the most powerful weapons. Cicero said, "Freedom is participation in power." Even the ancient Greeks and Romans wrestled with the problem of what it truly means to be free. 60 years ago, statesmen from 6 countries decided that the only true freedom was the freedom to act together. In other words, sovereignty meant having a seat at the table. That is why, in 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed. It so happens that I was born in the same year, and that the reality built on the Treaty of Rome is my whole life. And I don't think I have to tell you how important it is for me personally to be here today with you. Of course, everything looks more noble, deliberate, and calculated from today's perspective. There is a tendency to remember those who signed the Treaty of Rome as political geniuses and evangelists of a united Europe. The truth is that they were leaders with their own private doubts, under incredible pressure from events, and in a state of profound vulnerability. The collective powerlessness of Europe after the Second World War forced them together. The alternatives were extremely unattractive. And the horrors of the war's destruction were still clear to see every day. The vulnerability of these frightened European countries gave them the humility, clarity, and great wisdom to come together to sign the Treaty of Rome. That began a process that has since brought many more countries back to freedom and prosperity again, East and West. It has helped us to understand that when Europe is weak, her individual countries will be weak. If Europe is strong, her member states are strong. Only by being united together can we realize our own sovereignty, be truly free in the wider world. That was true then, and it is true today. It will be true in another 60 years. The Treaty of Rome has triumphed also because it was created and delivered by governments based on democratic consent. National parliaments, of which you are the representatives, therefore lend their powers to the European community with a message, please deliver in our common interest. This was a loan which has since been repaid with interest, even if there are disappointments and delays. Someone said once, Europe is like a tree. It grows every day, but you never see it growing. It is a rather romantic sentiment, but still true. From the seed of the Treaty of Rome grew changes that have altered the world around us so much that most people can no longer remember what things were like before. The treaty gave us open minds and open societies. And of course, the world's largest market for our prosperity. As a young man growing up under the shadow of the Iron Curtain, these things were almost impossible for me to imagine, although I had my dreams that one day they could happen. Next week's anniversary is a time for sober reflection as much as celebration. Even if we can see that our economic wounds are healing slowly, many people still despair about the scale and number of our current challenges. The greatest is the departure in a couple of years of Britain as a new EU member state. The best response to such tough times is to recapture the humility, clarity, and the wisdom of the original signatories. Only then can we make the right choices about the future. Because the past teaches us that Europe is at its best and most creative when it is at its most vulnerable, however paradoxical it may sound. It delivers much more with modest, patient ambition than with grand visions. This is one reason why I am happy that the president of the De Gasperi Foundation, Maria Romana De Gasperi, was here today. Now is the perfect time to recall her father's famous words. The future will not be built through force, nor the desire to conquer, but by the patient application of the democratic method, the constructive spirit of agreement, and by respect for freedom. Perhaps these words are not dramatic enough in the age of politics by Twitter, but I still appreciate their truth and power. I still believe they are enough to guide us from here. Thank you. Grazie.
Grazie.
Thank you. I'd like to call on the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. Thank you, President.
Europeans, I will today speak to you in what has become the lingua franca of our children's generation, bad English. I will share with you just a few lines of my personal history because we all have different personal histories. I see all these flags in this hall and I am reminded of Europe's diversity. My father and his family were liberated in 1944 by Polish soldiers. And had these Polish soldiers not given their lives for the freedom of my country, my father might not have lived and I wouldn't be standing here today. I myself, years later, grew up in a Europe where we had the scourge of terrorism in many countries. I lived in this city, in what they call the Anni di Piombo. I remember very well how much violence we feared. And certainly on St. Patrick's Day, I have to refer to the violence Ireland knew in those years, until we had the miracle of the Good Friday Agreement. And I think today we as fellow Europeans have a moral and political duty to make sure that the Good Friday Agreement is not jeopardized by Brexit. And I wish for all of us to make that commitment to our fellow Europeans in Ireland today. I also believe as a young man, I studied in France. And I remember in 1985 when we had a discussion about geopolitics, that one of the soldiers, a French soldier in the audience said, well, what are we going to do if there's ever going to be German reunification? Talking about 1985. And then all the German students stood up and said, go back to school, you stupid man. You've learned nothing. There's never going to be German reunification. It's nonsense. Europe's divide is eternal, and we are perfectly happy as Germans to have two Germanys. 4 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. That is how predictable history is, in hindsight. When I look back at my personal history, I was trained, after being a student, as a soldier to fight some of the nations that are now part of our European family and are sitting in this hall today. Isn't that a miracle in less than 40 years, 30 years actually? without any doubt, the most important event in my lifetime, without any doubt, for Europeans, is the end of the European divide. Now, the end of the European divide, as any tectonic change in human history, delivers great successes, but also problems. I see it in the country I know best and in other societies. There is a surge of what the Germans call Nostalgie, thinking back to the good old days where we still had this wall that separated us. But if you only look 5 minutes at the nation Poland, 5 minutes, that's all it takes. Through European history, Poland was never master of its own borders. If Russia was strong, Poland would be 300 kilometers to the west. If Russia was weak and Germany was strong, Poland would be 300 kilometers to the east. But never because the Poles wanted it. And now Poland, paradoxically, thanks to integration into the European Union and NATO, for the first time in a millennium, is master of its own destiny and of its own borders, which are beyond dispute. That is what Europe is all about. So looking back at my own lifetime today, I see that all too often we don't know our history very well, which means that we are open to blackmail by nostalgia, by people offering us images of history that never was, to project a future that will never be. Let's study our history, our common history, and all the differences we have, to be immune to too much nostalgia. Too much nostalgia is like too much wine. You know, wine is great, 1 or 2 glasses, but never drown in the bottle. And we should be careful that nostalgia does not become the new opium of the people in Europe. Some of the unease in our European Union is based on the fact that although we have different histories, we are now quite sure we have a common destiny. We are in this boat together. And that sometimes doesn't feel comfortable, because we are not always in agreement about the direction the boat should take. That is why Jean-Claude Juncker and I have decided to write the White Book on the future of Europe, with a number of scenarios, possibilities, and offer it as a discussion paper to take back home to your parliaments and to have a debate with your parliaments, with the public in your countries, about what the destiny of Europe should be, what the direction should be, what the organizational structure should be to best tackle all the challenges the world is throwing at us. Today, Europe has 2 types of member states: small member states and member states who don't know yet that they are small member states. Because the world out there is much bigger than Europe. United, we will be strong. But for this unity, we need a debate about what the purpose is of this unity. Our youngest generation is European in essence. That doesn't mean they like European institutions or want to come to Brussels. It means that their natural habitat is Europe. Their home is their nation, but their habitat is Europe. Our youngest generation is post-ideological, but very idealist. So let's give them things to dream about in our common future. And let me end on this. If we've made one big mistake in the last 15 years, it's to create the illusion that a common market is a goal per se, that a common currency is a goal per se, that having no borders is a goal per se. No, my friends, these are mere instruments. These are mere instruments to underscore and strengthen our values which are peace and prosperity, mutual understanding. Embrace the concept that dialogue is good, that compromise is not ugly, is a beautiful thing, that dialogue is not between people who already agree, But dialogue is to look for a conversation with people with whom you don't agree and then find common ground. That is what Ventotene was all about. That is what the founding fathers were all about. By small steps, trying to find common ground between countries and nations with different interests. This is more important today than it was 60 years ago. And let's be inspired by all the difficult situations our parents had to overcome. Let's be inspired and tell our children that if they could do that, our children can certainly even do more. And let's never forget that a Europe that is just about a common currency or a common market is a Europe set to fail. We need to make sure that Europe is about our values, and the instruments are interchangeable. The values are eternal. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. We would like to give the floor to the President Emeritus, Mr. Giorgio Napolitano.
Signor Presidente.
Mr. President, distinguished European guests, fellow senators, young men and women, in this very hall, the Italian Senate, that had just been restored to freedom, Alcide de Gasperi made his passionate and determined appeal for the approval of a federalist motion. The date was November the 15th, 1950. As Italian Prime Minister, 6 months earlier, de Gasperi had supported the Schuman Declaration, which was the beginning of the process of European integration and unity. Here in the Senate, he spoke as undisputed leader of the Christian Democrats and as well-established leader of Italy as of 1945. De Gasperi was uncompromising and firm in the face of the hostility of the socialist and communist left that had already engaged in the Cold War and the juxtaposition between the Western Bloc and the Soviet Bloc. De Gasperi strenuously defended the nascent project for European unity in the face of irony and skepticism, claiming that it was possible to create a united economic political body, a federation in Europe. And those who claimed that this was a myth, he answered, "Tell me, what myth can we offer our young people when it comes to the relationships between states, the future of our Europe, the future of our world, safety, security, peace, if not this drive towards a union?" And indeed, peace featured prominently among the key priorities. Schuman and Monnet had already shared with other founding countries the priority of the ideal of peace. And this had been turned into a concrete objective because the strength of the European project was precisely in going beyond the expression of values and ideals and translating them into clear and achievable objectives, the achievement of which was to be based on treaties, common institutions, European legal basis, availability of resources to be managed together, and a very clearly defined programme to advance the process of integration. In 1950, the objective of peace was inextricably tied to overcoming the conflicts between the Germans and the French. It was necessary to eradicate the real basis of this, pooling the production of coal and steel as strategic resources and transferring to common authority, sovereignty in that particular area. In other words, the aim was to challenge the dogma of the absolute sovereignty of nation-states, because that, at the very heart of Europe, was the origin of the tragedy of two destructive wars in the 20th century. I mentioned the European and federalist passion that De Gasperi successfully shared with other Italians. There was no fear of the word federal, as is the case now. And at a time of extraordinary political participation after the liberation of our country, obviously he was able to benefit from the channels provided by mass democratic political parties. The path that Europe has been on since then has not been easy, certainly not for Italy. In 1954, as was mentioned, the idea of a European defence community failed. And we must, however, point out that it more than a merely military objective. It aimed to promote a European political community, and this was the joint hope of both Alcide De Gasperi and Altiero Spinelli. Then our integration proceeded in 1957 thanks to the effort and success of the convergence of the 6 countries that were already members of the ECSC, and they pursued a less ambitious but feasible aim, that of establishing a European economic community, a common market on the basis of the treaties of Rome. Dear friends, as representatives of the European Union institutions, we have certainly witnessed an unprecedented venture in the history of our continent. And I think that for too many years we have not sufficiently recognized the extraordinary achievements of this design, hence ushering in mystifications on the part of Eurosceptics and those who would like to see the destruction of Europe. And I think we have to tell our young people personal stories, as my dear friend Timmermans has just done. There's a lot to be changed in the Union and the way it operates, but we should never forget what we have achieved in the course of these years. One cannot continue to lament United Europe's so-called democratic deficit, ignoring the fundamental role played with the direct election of the European Parliament and the essential strengthening of its powers. And we know that this occurred quite recently with the Treaty of Lisbon only 9 years ago. It is now upon us to ensure that we fulfill the parliamentary dimension of the Union in very close relationship between the European Parliament and national parliaments. It is through a renewed cultural, social and political participation that we can hope to consolidate and strengthen the democratic nature of Europe's process of integration and unity, particularly when it comes to the operation of European institutions. It is necessary to change the Union's decision-making capacity in terms of timing and in terms of its determination in pursuing integration. But where do the many dangers come from? Well, let's be clear. We should not ignore the fact that the dangers lie in the deplorable, alarming resurgence of nationalism, not only in Europe, but certainly in Europe. In the years after the Second World War, we, for the most part, underestimated the possibility of nation-states recovering strength and consensus. In the Ventotene Manifesto, the idea was that they would be shattered under the burden of the destructive virulence and aberration of Nazism and fascism. And yet, there was recovery. Nation-states rose again, and the path towards integration continued. Now, we have to face not just the latent crises that have affected Europe since 2008, but more recent years we have witnessed clear regression on the part of a number of member states and governments, members of the Union, and there's no need for me to add anything further. Therefore, we need clarity and courage when it comes to our key objectives. Firstly, closer integration, a political integration, finally, against the danger of new nationalism that goes hand in hand with the nihilist and misleading demagoguery of populist parties and movements. And I would like to recognize the results of the Dutch election. Integration should not in any way be hostage to those member states in the 27 member union that don't intend to move ahead. We obviously need to make decisions urgently to tackle the issue of migrations, and we know that finally we have to implement the decisions that were enshrined in the 5 Presidents' report to complete Europe's economic and monetary union and its political union so as to strengthen its social dimension and drive its growth. At the same time, Europe has to find different ways of seeking unity in the areas on which there is widespread consensus. I'm referring to culture in particular. European culture has an extraordinary richness, as was taught by that great European Bronislaw Geremek. Let us not forget the warning of François Mitterrand in his final speech at the Parliament in Strasbourg in 1995, the Europe of culture against the Europe of nationalisms, because nationalisms equal war. So, against the threat of protectionism and nationalism, we need to look to Europe and look beyond our borders and see that there is disorder and disarray at a global level. And here in Europe, our priority is peace and unity. And once again, we wish to state this boldly as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome.
Thank you. Now we give the floor to the Life Senator and former Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Monti.
Signor Presidente del
Mr. President of the Senate, Presidents, ladies and gentlemen, we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome on the same day, 17th of March, on which Italy celebrates its national unity, its constitution, its anthem, and its flag. There is consistency between these two events and the values they represent. Certainly there is total consistency, but it is a demanding consistency for Italy as for every other member state. I developed this persuasion having had the twofold privilege of serving Europe as Italian member at the Commission and subsequently through the appointment of President Napolitano and the endorsement of the Parliament, the task of leading Italy in a very difficult period for the country. As a commissioner, I swore to act independently in the interest of the community. I never, in complying with this oath as a commissioner, I never thought that I was at the same time not working usefully for Italy, because a solid development of the European Union has always been a positive input for Italy and an incentive for modernization. As head of the Italian government, I swore an oath in the interests of the Italian Republic in performing my tasks in the interests of Italy. I always felt that in doing so, we would also contribute to the solidity and the development of the European Union. In particular, when I presented the program of my government in November 2011 in this very chamber, I stated You will never see me ask for a sacrifice because Europe asks for one. And in the same way, I will never blame Europe for things which we need to do and which will be unpopular. If the request of Europe is not in line with the letter and the spirit of Europe, I will not accept the request, but I do not believe this will happen. If it is in line with the letter and the spirit of Europe, it means that this is a request which comes on the basis of a principle, on the basis of a treaty which we have contributed to as a country. Certainly, the European Union is at a point of crisis. It is at a point of crisis because of its weakness and also because of its boldness. It was bold and almost fearless in today's world to fight for the rule of law and democratic systems based on the division of powers, the respect of human rights, the respect of future generations. For example, in protecting the environment or the climate and avoiding that at birth new citizens are not burdened by the debts which have been generated by their fathers and their grandfathers and those who were in government when they were born. Particularly ambitious is Europe's ambition to establish multilateral governance, which Europe can undertake using the money method with the community over dimension of multilateral governance from the very beginning, in which we would like to see applied increasingly in the world. Multilateral governance and not the rule of the strongest. Bearing the beacon of these values, Europe is increasingly moving against the stream. We need to realize this, and Europe will need to integrate more, become more united, redress its weaknesses, not just to defend itself, but to defend and effectively promote its values in the world, which to which we attach increasing importance as we see less and less allegiance worldwide to these values. So only in three spheres, the European Union and in particular the European Commission, represented here so effectively by the first Vice President Franz Timmermans, only in three fields, I was saying, is the European Union believed, respected, and when necessary feared in the world. And these are simply the three fields in which member states have decided to confer federal powers, President Napolitano would be saying, of decision-making, the fields of international trade, competition, and currency. But in order for Europe to overcome its weakness and to become increasingly strong to defend itself and its values, I believe that it is important to reconsider the attitudes of member states towards European construction and European values. In the past, heads of state and government went to Brussels in order to attend European Council meetings, taking a little brick with them to build a common home, in the persuasion that it would be in the national interest of every country to see this common home strengthened. Today, I see President Tusk, who with great dignity chairs that supreme body, the European Council. I see that it's increasingly frequently at that level and at the level of Council of Ministers that European ministers go, not bringing their own stone, their own brick, but trying to take a brick away from the incomplete community construction, desperate as they are, because this is the way national policy implementation has developed, desperate as they are to acquire popular support. Once people look for support and consensus for the future elections. If elections are far away, people are looking for support and approval for the poll to be held next week, which may be decisive for political leaders. And even national interest is sometimes neglected because one can negotiate on the basis of the interests of a single party, a coalition, or in order that an individual take the power in its own party. And this is why the British Prime Minister decided to become part of history by taking something away from the European Union and perhaps also contributing to the decline of his own country. And it's necessary. I see that there's a tendency to combat dangerous populism, which has a bottom-up direction, with equally dangerous populism, which is top-down. When Prime Minister Gentiloni came here to speak to us of his government policy at the Senate and his line on Europe, I think we all appreciated his will to contribute to the improvement of the structures of Europe firmly, but avoiding these distortions which are the new cancer of Europe. Mr. Grasso previously said 60, 70 years ago, it wasn't so much the governments, but more the peoples who wanted Europe to come together. If we think that the biggest risk is the end, the greatest danger for the end of Europe is nationalist tendencies. Perhaps the time has come for Europe to be reconquered by its peoples, by us citizens, who perhaps need to become more demanding in this area with regard to those who govern and to the political classes in member states.
Grazie. Alla parola adesso.
I'd like to now call on Professor Sofia Corradi, who introduced the Erasmus program that, as we know, is greatly appreciated by young European citizens. You have the floor. With your permission, I will remain seated. Firstly, I would like to thank you for having honored me with the invitation to speak at this conference. As we all know, since 1987, the Erasmus program enables European citizens, European students, to have the precious experience of 1 or 2 semesters of life and study in an institution of higher education in a European country different from their own, with full recognition of credits, therefore without causing any delay in graduation at home. Differences in methods and content between 2 institutions are accepted with flexibility according to the principle of reciprocal esteem and trust between 2 universities, and are indeed considered as a benefit of the Erasmus experience. All of this may seem very normal to us now, but unfortunately, in 1969, that which today seems simple and obvious was rejected and viewed with great suspicion. I had to fight for nearly 20 years to overcome this resistance. And finally, in 1987, the official launch of the Erasmus program was introduced by the European Union. Those who may wish to do so may read the whole story in my latest book entitled Erasmus and Erasmus Plus, published in 2015. And this book can now be downloaded free of charge in either English or Italian from the website www.sofiacorradi.eu. The Erasmus program was initially quite laborious. It took 20 years before we got the first, let's say, student who graduated within the framework of the Erasmus student program. Now we have a growing number of students, 1 million every 3 years are the figures that we have at the moment. I'm often asked, how did I come up with this initial idea? Well, it all happened after having spent a year abroad at Columbia University with a Fulbright scholarship. And coming back from New York, I was arrogantly refused recognition of credits for studies carried out in New York. Well, when you're young, you really think you can change the world. And since I had realized that a year abroad had in fact benefited me hugely, I wanted other young people to have the same opportunity. I wanted experience such as studying abroad to be no longer a privilege for affluent families. I want this to be available to anyone wishing to have this experience. The numerous difficulties and resistance encountered did not stop me, not least because these were the years of the so-called Cold War between the world's major powers, and I considered the promotion of international student mobility as my own pacifist mission. To be very clear, I would like to explain what Erasmus is not. The goal of Erasmus is not the acquisition of foreign languages. Erasmus is not reserved for excellent students. It is also for normal students. Erasmus does not seek to provide abroad better tuition than what a student can find at his home university. An engineering student who goes on an Erasmus program doesn't become a better engineer. He or she becomes a better person. Statistics tell us that after having completed university studies, an Erasmus student, this is based on experience, finds work in half the time required by non-Erasmus peers. Statistics tell us that after 10 years' work, an Erasmus student reaches decision-making managerial levels. This, of course, is something we are very happy about, but we must point out that the most important outcome of an Erasmus experience is that by spending 1 or 2 semesters in a different culture, in full immersion, an Erasmian develops a whole set of valuable transversal qualities and skills. And Erasmians know this very clearly. And we can see this if we look at some of the answers they have given to surveys. For instance, students say that a period of life and study abroad develops creativity, strengthens a young person's self-confidence. Students say that this teaches you how to tune in to other people's wavelengths. This experience, according to others, impresses indelible feelings of human brotherhood. Others say you become a European citizen, a citizen of the world. Many students reply, simply, Erasmus has changed my life. The essential point is that Erasmus is not primarily a study program. It is above all an experience. A full immersion in a different culture is especially beneficial for maturation of a beneficiary's personality. And this is thanks to the fact that interaction is between equals, between people of the same age, and generally people with the same cultural level who are faced with the same practical problems. of everyday university life. In other words, an Erasmian needs to attend no course on European integration because everything is learnt through experience. Since 2014, Erasmus has been renamed Erasmus Plus, and it has been enhanced. And there are a number of different initiatives that have been added to the core program, covering different human activities and different continents, notwithstanding the well-known global crisis. The European Union's financial contribution has been increased by 45%, which is a considerable figure indeed, and now amounts to 15 billion euros for the 7-year period we're in at the moment. In 2017, as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome, we also celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Erasmus programme. Allow me to end by expressing the following hope: that future years will bring further developments of these instruments for the promotion of intercultural understanding. And I use this broader term intentionally. With this, I would like to end, thanking you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to the Italian Prime Minister, who will conclude our remarks, I'd like to greet the representatives of regions present, President Bertelli, President of the Governors State of the Vatican State, the representative of the Jewish community, and the representative of the Islamic Cultural Center, and the Deputy President of the Federation of Evangelical Churches in Italy. So I wish to thank the representatives of the religions, and I'd like to thank the Holy See and Cardinal Bertello for having made available to everybody the torso of the Belvedere from the Vatican Museums. And I'd like to give the floor to Paolo Gentiloni, who will be concluding our work.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. President's kind guests. We, over the coming days, from now till next Saturday and beyond, will have to live together with the paradox that at one of the most difficult moments in the life of the European Union, we'll often be talking about its achievements and its results, and the gifts it has bestowed upon our generation and the generations to come. I think that we need to be aware of this difficulty and not be intimidated by it. It's not that we are speaking of the achievements of the European Union to bolster our courage as political leaders in Europe. We're saying this because this is the history of the last 60 years, and because of the fact that this history is not very well known and has not been presented adequately, and it was a mistake on our part not to present this story adequately, and this has been one of the causes of our current difficulties. Therefore, we should not be scared in the next few days when we speak of the achievements in peace, in welfare, and the great economic strength. It's been called the quiet superpower, the European Union, and particularly the achievements of freedom. Václav Havel, a great European, spoke of the emergence of his country from dictatorship by calling it a return to Europe. The idea that Europe has been a magnet with positive attraction first in the Iberian Peninsula, then in Greece, and then Central and Eastern Europe, attracting countries to liberty. And now, at a time when we openly recall what the European Union has been and what we are, we have an alternative before us with regard to our coming years, because the alternative is either regretting these achievements or defending these achievements. If we don't defend them, we will regret them. And I believe that here in the chamber of the Senate, we have to say boldly that this is the time to defend them in order to avoid having to regret their disappearance. And there is a popular basis on which we can do this. We've listened to Frans Timmermans' outstanding speech. And this week we've all felt a bit Dutch. And we also have discussions sometimes with the Netherlands on the financial policies of the European Union. But the election results made us all feel more European and more Europeanist. In order to defend our values and not relinquish and regret them, I think we have to have a clear vision of the nature of the difficulties we have before us, which are not necessarily transitional difficulties. Certainly there have been political decisions. Senator Monti was recalling this, which on the 23rd of June led to the Brexit decision in the United Kingdom. Certainly there are subjective decisions on the part of certain parties and certain political groups which are pushing against Europe. But we have to be honest. The challenge we have before us is something which is due to much deeper trends which undermine the edifice of the European Union at depth. Because first of all, we have to face the economic difficulties on our continent, and in particular for middle classes, the lower middle classes on our continent. If we open our gaze to the last 10 to 15 years, we see that globally we've had hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who have moved out of poverty into relative affluence, particularly in Asia, and this has created some negative consequences in our part of the world. In 2007, 2008, we faced the most serious economic crisis since the end of the war. Sometimes we forget this, and at the same time, in the Mediterranean area, we've seen threats to our security, asymmetrical threats, as the jargon goes. But we can recall the division of Europe into two blocks and the terrorism there was in Europe a few decades ago. This threat, which has entered the Mediterranean area, is something which has destabilized our countries very, very in great depth. And then we have the migratory flows. So if we want to defend our conquests, our achievements, we have to face up honestly to the problems which dig below the structure of Europe and create problems for us. Some of our fellow citizens, this is an important point, feel less protected and more threatened than they were, and they try to find a response to this feeling of not being protected in rediscovering their roots and their identities, which, however, often are connected to the rediscovery of hyper-sovereignist or nationalist tendencies. I think that is what we need to face up to. We have a crisis which is undermining Europe, and responses which are understandable when people feel threatened, when they feel devoid of protection. People look for protection in their own areas, in their own identities. But if your identity becomes closure, if your identity becomes hostility to any difference, if your identity becomes opposing your neighbors, these are all premises which may lead us to repeat terrible episodes in our European history, as President Napolitano reminded us in his talk. We cannot be indulgent towards people who hark back to nationalism and opposition between individual countries. These are processes which we can see the birth of, but if we don't stop them in time, it will be difficult to curb them if they grow too much. And our response cannot be that of a Europe which stands still, which chooses to face up to obstacles by treading water. We need to have a Europe which moves forward. And so, in conclusion, what do I think the goals we can set ourselves realistically in this situation? In view of the celebration we'll have on Saturday of the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome, there are two things I truly believe in. First of all, the message that Europe cannot stand still, it must move forward, and it must also move forward with the flexibility which this forward motion may require. We know there's a very wide-ranging discussion on this, and the white paper of the European Commission has laid down some tracks for the future direction of the European Union. But the point, I believe, is very clear. Moving forward does not in any way mean choosing to exclude anybody. I said this in Strasbourg, and I repeat this here. Italy will never accept a division between Eastern, Western Europe, a first division and a second division Europe. We, as one of the founding countries, want to move ahead together with a Europe of 27 member states. But we don't want the speed and the direction of this Europe to be decided mainly by the most reluctant countries. There's nothing revolutionary in this. The Lisbon treaties envisage the possibility of enhanced cooperation actions to be taken out. We just didn't. We just haven't done this. There's no revolution here. We need to make use of the instruments in our treaties so as not to give citizens who feel they are not protected, give these people the impression that Europe is immobile and incapable of providing answers to the situation. And another thing which is connected to Europe taking an initiative is the need to answer the 3 or 4 issues which many have mentioned in their talks. Mr. Tajani, Donald Tusk referred to this in their speeches, and we know where we need to act, and we know that we can do more in the area of defense and security, which is the area where there was a false start 65 years ago. Today, this could be a field where we can move forward more. It also means providing a response to the issue of migration. We know that the idea of a Europe which leaves it up to a couple of countries to deal with the entire burden of migratory policies because of their geographical situation. Is not a Europe which responds to the needs it should tackle. And finally, the great issue of growth, investments, and the economic development of Europe. We should not be drawn by an idea which, because of some macroeconomic issues, which Mr. Draghi referred to in his report, there are some more encouraging macroeconomic data constantly, but we should not confuse these more encouraging macroeconomic data with the illusion that the social policies which we've had in Europe are obsolete. They're not. Work to promote growth and to provide social security is something which needs to move ahead. We shouldn't stop now at a time when Europe is gradually nudging forward in the area of recovery. So, these days, and in particularly Saturday's day of celebration, will, I hope, be fruitful moments in relaunching this course. And I hope this will be done with the not only with the support which we require when we go to European councils. We always have a discussion with a vote in our national parliament in Italy and other countries, giving a mandate to the government with regards to what should be taken to the European Council. Sometimes this mandate is not debated sufficiently, but I ask you, members of European parliaments, to provide your support for this relaunching of Europe. It's important to be an active part, because without democratic legitimation, a course of this kind, which has its values in freedom and democracy, cannot make any headway. And so Europe can be relaunched, and it can be especially if the European Parliament and the national parliaments provide a push to its governments in the direction in which we need to go. Thank you.
Grazie. Ringrazio.
Thank you. I wish to thank you all for having joined us today, and I would like to invite the heads of delegation to go downstairs in the hemicycle for the family photo before visiting the exhibition on Europe and democracy from the 15th to the 20th century.